screen. I assume people can see my screen okay? Great, okay. Well, good. I want to welcome everyone to the first research conference for the new academic year. I apologize that I was not able to attend the orientation last week. I actually have a slide about what I was doing. You'll see it has a different context, but I was actually in Germany last week. But anyways, as kind of has been the tradition for the last number of years, I usually kick off the uh, research conference. We're now entering our second year of, I guess technically third year if you count the latter half of 2 years ago, as this conference being virtual, and it's probably going to be virtual for some period of time. That said, I will go ahead and give you my talk. I trying to spend less than the full hour. I will leave some time at the end if people want to chime in on anything that I have said or omitted. So as I typically do, I will talk a little bit about the state of the program, talking about the department, the research, education, and faculty. And then I'll make a few comments about the state of the field. Obviously, I can't cover everything, but just some of the highlights on some of the things I think are important. And then again, I'll leave some time at the end for others to chime in or ask questions. So, as you all know, we are the Department of Medical Informatics and Clinical Epidemiology, an academic department in the School of Medicine focused on three areas: bioinformatics and computational biomedicine, clinical epidemiology, and health and clinical informatics. We carry out our mission through programs of research, education, and service. And we are very well known around the world, at least in the informatics field, for the work that we do. And we have a website which has that nice vanity URL. And we also have a blog, which anyone is welcome to come up with ideas to publish about. So it has been a challenging year and a half for the department, for the university, for the world. We have made I think we've demonstrated over the last 18 months that we can pretty much function as a virtual organization. Although I think many of you, like myself, would love to be around others. We were all set. We had our plans for returning to the office, and then Delta came. And so we're continuing to function remotely. Hopefully that won't be forever. One good bit of news, even though in informatics we work a lot with technology, but we really are a people field, and we focus on how technology can can benefit people, especially related to health and healthcare and public health. And fortunately, for those of us who have been around a while and have a lifetime of friends and colleagues, and also have various tools now to keep in touch with them. So, and I know that there are some generational differences in how social media is used, but certainly I have fortunately been able to keep in touch with a lot of good friends and colleagues, mainly with Facebook. I know that's kind of maybe placing me in a certain generation, but I use other social media tools as well. But for the social side of it, for better or worse, and I have my issues with Facebook, the company, but it is a nice tool to keep in touch with people. And another good bit of news is that actually the university's finances are doing pretty well. The department is doing pretty well. And so we move on. And but again, I personally, I hope that we can start um, interacting in person again. So we'll see. So just a little, speaking of money, certainly money is not the most important thing when it comes to our research, but it is something by which we're judged. And DMICE has done particularly well over the years. You see, these are the kind of data points that people like department chairs keep. An interesting aspect of this is you look at our research funding, which has gradually increased over time, and then there's two spikes, which correlate with, well, not correlate, which are occurred during global crises. The first big spike was back in around 2009, 2010, during the Great Recession and all the money that was poured into health IT. And then the second spike, a little bit smaller of a one, was last year. In particular, a lot of the funding that became available in the early days of the pandemic. But again, money is not the only important thing. We do well with publications, thanks to Catherine Pyle for keeping track of these things well. And not only just publications, but publications in top journals, whether it's top informatics journals or top medical journals. And it's mostly the Evidence-Based Practice Center from the Clinical Epidemiology Group that does a lot of systematic reviews that are published in very high-profile journals. We actually have a pretty good success rate of grant funding. The overall NIH funding, some of you may be aware of, is depending on the institute, is 10 to 20%. We do considerably better than that. And our educational programs are very robust. It's great for me to see a lot of students in this talk. You really are an important part of what we do. I know that many of us, hopefully all, but certainly many of the faculty are very passionate about teaching and helping you launch your careers in informatics. So things like the National Library Medicine Training Grant that's been funded continuously since 1992, making it the largest and second longest running training grant at OHSU. We also had the distinction of hosting the first ever virtual trainees meeting. I've been attending the NLM trainees meeting since I was an NLM trainee in the late 1980s. It's an important meeting to get to know future colleagues. I'm not sure that the virtual format captures everything that one can do in person, but nonetheless, trainees have been able to present their work and interact with others. We have also had our graduate program since 1996. That's when we launched our master's degree program. We launched our PhD program in 2003. We started teaching online courses in 1999. We, in partnership with AMIA, our professional association, launched the 10 by 10 program, which is an adaptation of the Biomedical Informatics 510 course that I teach. We're zeroing in probably sometime next year on 3,000 people having completed the OHSU offering. And some of those people use that course as a launching point into their informatics studies. We've also been the recipient of many educational grants over the years. Part of that big spike back from around 2011 was the funding we received from the Office of the National Coordinator. And our work goes on. I just learned a couple weeks ago that a new grant has been funded with some colleagues from the University of Cape Town. Last year, the NIH announced a new initiative called Harnessing Data Science for Health Discovery and Innovation in Africa. And I'm already I'm on a scientific advisory board of a project called Health and Human Heredity in Africa, their bioinformatics network. I know many of you are wondering, Bill, bioinformatics, but I'm actually the clinical informatics representative. on that scientific advisory board, and that enabled us to put together this grant proposal. And so some of our online clinical informatics courses, probably starting next year, may see some students, or should see some students from the University of Cape Town and possibly other universities around Africa, making the world a smaller place. We've also been involved with medical students, teaching medical students, Paul Gorman, Vishnu Mohan, Jeff Gold, Gretchen Scholl, and others. Our medical students at OHSU probably get more clinical informatics than any other medical school in the country. We also have we've also been active in the new physician clinical informatics subspecialty, one of the first programs to receive accreditation from the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education. I see several of our clinical informatics fellows here, and actually, so we're not only we're one of the first programs, there are actually several other fellowship programs that use our online courses, which also creates nice peer groups and so forth. And Vishnu Mohan has led that. And then we've also been developing continuing education. We have heard from our alumni over the years, not just physicians wanting CME credit, but other alumni wanting to continue to interact with us. And so we can continue to have continuing education courses. You've seen versions of this slide in other talks that I've given, but we have a wide reach of our program with our online program. I mentioned Africa a moment ago. We have other international collaborations, and also have many students from around the country. You see the numbers there, which that table was updated after this past year's graduation. If you do get a chance to walk into our office on the 5th floor of the BIC, I just saw it the other day. This bookcase is still there behind Diane's desk that has, actually, this is just some of the theses and dissertations that have been done over the years. There's actually another shelf worth of them. So our students have been very productive as well. We also have some highly accomplished faculty. Some of this is news that's almost hot off the press. Many of you know Peter Emby, who was a postdoc and also did our master's degree, completing the program back in 2002. We were excited a number of years ago when he was appointed president and CEO of the Regenstrief Institute, which is the research arm connected with Indiana University. Well, as some of you who maybe follow various social media channels or AMIA email lists know, Peter has just been appointed chair of the Department of Biomedical Informatics at Vanderbilt, one of the very prestigious programs in the country. And in fact, he will now be becoming the boss of another highly accomplished alumnus, Adam Wright, who was our first PhD graduate, and he set the bar very high. And so Adam has been a professor in the Department of Biomedical Informatics at Vanderbilt, but Adam also has been awarded this year the Donald A.B. Lindbergh Award for Innovation in Informatics. So we're very proud of Adam. I actually won that award a year after Adam graduated. And so it's good to see another OHSU connection. We have many other accomplished alumni. I can't really list them all here, but I just wanted to show some of the diverse interests. So some of you know Jayashri Kalpathy Kramer, who has become very prominent in the imaging informatics world. She is at Harvard Medical School, and Surendra Dasari, who works in bioinformatics and is an associate professor at the Mayo Clinic. And then I just threw in a recent graduate, Adam Rule, who has just started his position at the University of Wisconsin in the Information School as a tenure track assistant professor. and there's many others. It's always risky to make lists of people because you may leave people out. So I didn't want to leave out the members of our alumni who are now members of our faculty. And we have a long lineage of faculty who are graduates of our program, starting with Paul Gorman, who did a postdoc before we even had the NLM funding or any degree program. Followed on the heels by Joan Ash, who also we received news today that she is going to be honored at the AMIA meeting as a distinguished fellow of the American College of Medical Informatics, which is the honorific society that's part of AMIA that honors leaders in the field. Aaron Cohen was the early, well, not so early graduate of our program and joined our faculty. Eilish Boudreau, Vishnu, Steve, Mike, Lisa, Michelle, Jamie, and then most recently, Dana Womack, who graduated with her PhD and actually did a little bit of postdoc work and then joined the faculty. And Ben Orwell, who was the first graduate of our clinical informatics fellowship to join our faculty, who has a joint appointment with pediatrics. I apologize if I left anyone out, and if I did, you can bring it up at the end and make sure that everyone is announced. It's also important to acknowledge the current students in the program. We have currently 98 students who are actively enrolled in the program. You see the numbers a little higher for health and clinical informatics, reflecting our online, well, historically online. I guess everyone is online now. But all across the different programs, PhD, master's, and graduate certificate. And I hope to interact with all of you during the course of the year and the course of your studies at OHSU. We also have a very distinguished faculty. I would argue among the most accomplished informatics faculties anywhere in the country or the world. Again, my slides only have a sampling. You can actually go to our website and get a complete listing. Of course, as much as we try to keep the website up to date, new people come along, and so we do our best. We also have faculty who are in institutional leadership roles. David Dorr, who's OHSU's Chief Research Information Officer. Karen Eden, who just completed a term as president of the Faculty Senate. Paul Gorman, involved in many medical school activities. Shannon McWeeny, who's the Director of Computational Biomedicine at the NITE. Vishnu Mohan, who's the Program Director of our fellowship. And Cynthia Morris, who is involved with Oak Tree, our Clinical and Translational Research Institute, and also heads up the large collaborative program with Portland State called Build Exito, which aims to provide a pathway for historically underrepresented students to pursue careers in research, not just becoming faculty and PI, but careers as research associates, research assistants, and so forth. So we really are a team in DMICE. And, as I've mentioned, our faculty have a broad array of interests and accomplishments. And I will always put in my plug for the faculty to present at this conference, so our own students can hear about the great work that you do. Sometimes we do 2-for-1s where we have two faculty present, so they only have to have 30 minutes of presentation. But hopefully we'll get a lot of faculty on the list. And one of the silver linings of the pandemic has been that we've actually been able to have more external speakers. We've had several. We had over the summer, we had William Brown, Sarah Rossetti, and Kendra Cato, among others. And if anyone has someone they would like us to invite, just drop me an email and I would be happy to invite them. One of the advantages of the virtual conference is that they don't have to leave their home. Of course, part of the fun of being an invited speaker is actually going to um, speak at a particular location. We also have incredibly competent staff in our department. We have the central departmental DMICE staff, and Marshall, our department administrator, Megan, Alicia, Catherine, and Monica. And then we also have staff related to the educational program led by Andrea, but also Diane, Lauren, Lynn, Virginia, and Kate. And then we have other members around the department who support individual faculty and projects. And of course, we have students and fellows who will hopefully be presenting and defending their work at this conference, also at the NLM trainees meeting and in other venues, and making valuable contributions to the activities of the department. I encourage people to follow us on social media. Probably our main channel is Twitter. Somehow there's someone behind the curtain who's out there tweeting from OHSU Informatics. I don't know who that is. It's actually me. In addition to being department chair, I'm our social media chair. And we also have a blog. And if you have something interesting you want to write about, something that you or your group has accomplished, let us know and we'll work with you to get it posted. And of course, then we will disseminate it out there by our Twitter feed and other means. Okay, well, that's my kind of brief overview of the department. So let me switch gears and talk a little bit about the state of the field. Again, I'm just going to touch on some real highlights here, and I'll be interested to hear if others want to add some additional things that are important. But I'll start by talking about some of the lessons learned from the pandemic, but also note that the rest of the field has not stood still, and other things have been happening. And I will talk about these 4 topics again briefly. So I think we've learned a lot of lessons about the world from the pandemic. We've also learned informatics lessons. And it's clear that, especially in the United States, our public health information infrastructure has not really been up to the task of giving us up-to-date information about the pandemic. It's playing out right now. Unfortunately, the CDC doesn't have the means to track every breakthrough infection and associate that with vaccination status, things like that, with sequencing of the virus, if it's the Delta variant, which pretty much all cases are now. There's been a lot written, and by the way, I will be pointing to some references that you can get. There's a PDF on my webpage that has all of these citations if you want to follow any of them, and also my slides. And of course, also I sent out a tweet this morning with the URL to the PDF file. We've also not been able to have a good clinical trials infrastructure to evaluate different therapies and to quickly dispense of those that are of no benefit. So we should, for example, and we did do studies of things like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. They weren't up to the task, and that should be the end of it. But unfortunately, there's not a robust infrastructure to keep track of all those trials and to pursue the promising new therapies. Also, somewhat related to my research interests are that we have learned that both our professional and our general information channels are easily abused. I'll talk about that in the next slide. And then we've also learned that our inadequacies of our data, of our algorithms, exacerbate our health disparities and impede our racial justice. I'll talk about that too. There was a headline earlier this week in the New York Times, something that's very well known about the um, um, uptake, the variable uptake in different parts of the United States, which is associated with political views, red and blue, and that this has also led to disparities in hospitalizations, deaths, and so forth from COVID. And most of this misinformation or disinformation has come from a particular side of the political spectrum, unfortunately. It's unfortunate that COVID has been politicized. It would be much better if it were not. And then we also have means to, in the old days, there's always been misinformation, disinformation around in the world. But in the old days, it mostly stayed within small groups of people. But we have social media, we have groups, entities that know how to use social media to vastly get out that message that then competes with more authoritative and correct information. And we also, there's an element of society that is very anti-science. Professor Peter Hotez, who I actually don't follow a massive number of people on Twitter. There's just not enough hours in the day. However, Peter Hotez is one that I do follow. He's the Dean of Tropical Medicine at Texas Children's Hospital, something like that. I may have gotten his title wrong, but he's written very eloquently about the anti-science movement and the ideology that drives it. And the results are seen in this screenshot of the front page of the New York Times from earlier in the week, which I actually captured because another person I enjoy following on Twitter is Eric Topol, who's also been very good about um, um, describing, annotating the stream of science around COVID. Another interesting phenomenon that's happened is that some of the things that we think are valuable in science, like open science with preprints and things like that, which I think I still think are very important, but clearly this system can be abused. So our publishing, scientific publishing system has been overwhelmed with publications, and some of them are only have cursory peer review. Some of them don't have peer review at all. Some of them get retracted when things happen. But unfortunately, once something has gotten out there onto the internet, it may take on a life of its own. And this has historically been a problem, but it's just so exacerbated with the pandemic. And not only that, you have a lot of people who are doing systematic reviews, and so they're pulling in sometimes these studies that were later retracted or otherwise of low quality. And part of this is preprints. Preprints are a great phenomena. I certainly have enjoyed being able to put my own work up on a preprint server as it's being peer reviewed. So they speed dissemination of information, good and bad. And so, again, just some recent examples from the past few weeks. I guess one of the early ivermectin trials was riddled with errors, with plagiarism and things like that, yet it was the first large clinical trial, so it got a lot of press. It never made it beyond a preprint server, but the damage was done, and actually the preprint server that it was published on finally withdrew the paper. And then sometimes other things happen. This happened, I think, just in the last week. Some Canadian researchers made an error in the adverse event rate of one of the vaccines that has myocarditis as a adverse effect. Unfortunately, it was published on the preprint server. The anti-vaccination groups just pounced all over it. And then when the error was discovered, which resulted in about a 20-fold increase of the estimate of myocarditis, it was too late. Although the preprint was fixed, but unfortunately, the information had been disseminated. So unfortunately, there is a better way, and so I'm going to take a little detour. I mentioned that I was not able to attend orientation last week. I had the opportunity actually to go to Germany and actually a little side trip into Austria. Some of you know Professor Reinhold Hauks, who had a big retirement celebration, and he invited me to visit, and so I turned it into a vacation. Clearly, the European countries are handling COVID a lot better, and it bears out in the statistics when you look at the number of cases and so forth. But I had to show my vaccination card to get into Germany in the first place. Now, unfortunately, our vaccination documentation system could be better. And I'll get to that in a moment. But not only did I have to show my vaccination card to get into the country, I also had to show it to get into most tourist venues, to eat inside restaurants and things like that. And they also do a lot of contract tracing. And how do they do this? There's actually an app some of you may have heard of called Luca. And Luca can store your verifiable vaccine credential, and it performs contact tracing. So, for example, if you go to a big tourist site, actually the way I had to do it was I have the upper picture as a sign, and I would put my phone up and capture that QR code, and I would log in that I was visiting this particular site. It would then actually, I'd have to type in my cell phone number, and then it would send me a text message, and then it would ask me when I was leaving to sign out. And of course, the advantage to that is if there were any kind of outbreak that I may have been exposed to, I would be able to be notified. Now, in our country, there's a lot of maybe concern about the kind of big brother nature of this. But on the other hand, when cases occur, they're quickly detected. And that then leads to another thing that's very common in almost on every street corner, is rapid testing. So not only if you're having symptoms, but also if you're in certain occupations. For example, my wife and I went on a food tour, and the tour guide was actually an opera singer. And she actually, during the opera season, had to get tested daily because singing is one way, if you're infected with COVID, of spreading it. And so she had to show up each day with a negative rapid test. And so this keeps the numbers way down. And if it's positive, you quarantine until you're better. And so it was an interesting experience to see, and I thought I would share with you all. And there's certainly informatics aspects of this. I'm not just telling you about my summer vacation. But let's talk about some of the other areas. I think that we continue to do work. We continue to see progress and also challenges with machine learning and artificial intelligence in biomedicine. Most of the successes in machine learning are with well-curated data sets. And I actually wrote in my blog, and actually I participated in the Bridge to AI workshop with the NIH, where people put forth grand challenges. And I put forth the grand challenge. It was one of 25 that was accepted for presentation, about the need for us to have translational AI, that we need to go beyond just having a data set, showing it works well, showing it works as well as radiologists or whoever, but actually figuring out how to make it work in clinical settings. And I think that's the next big frontier for AI. And I hope students looking for research projects will think about that sort of thing. And we still have challenges. Many of the studies published are poorly designed. In machine learning, most of them are retrospective. So, we know that they work well with the data set, but they don't go much beyond that. There's a lot of other concerns now that are bubbling up with algorithms and AI. As many of you know, Epic, the most widely used and the one also used at OHSU, has a number of proprietary algorithms, which people are concerned about because they're proprietary. And there have been some studies that have shown that they don't work well in all settings. They've actually been shown to be effective in some. So we need a better way to evaluate algorithms. They should not be black boxes. Well, I suppose all deep learning algorithms are black boxes in some sense, but we should be able to know how they're trained and what they do and so forth. In fact, our friend Peter Emby, who I mentioned earlier in the talk, came up with a new term. It's kind of offshoot of the term pharmacovigilance, where we need to monitor drugs as they're approved and used in the healthcare system. By the same token, we need algorithmovigilance, in that we need to be vigilant and tracking and see how well they work and where they fall down around algorithms. An interesting paper was published earlier this year about this is the group that includes Ken Mandel and others at Boston Children's, about data set shifts, that they call it. So we may train an algorithm or train a model on a particular data set using a particular technology with a particular population, and things may change. Clinician behavior may change, patient behavior may change. So we need to be cognizant of these things. And we also need to study them in a prospective way. And this is actually an example of a good study. The study by Escobar came from Kaiser Permanente. They carried out a prospective cohort study of an algorithm. They added more hospitals, and then they measured the effect as the algorithm was implemented. The algorithm was open, nothing about it was proprietary, and they actually showed that they were able to detect patients deteriorating in the hospital earlier and achieve better clinical outcomes. So there are ways to do this, and hopefully we'll do that. Another interesting data point, a paper published by a friend of ours from Australia that some of you know, Enrico Coiera, who noted that the vast number of clinical decision support studies in the informatics literature have rarely been replicated. Moving the clinical decision support rule to a new institution, maybe with a new patient set, things like that. One bright spot is a growing quantity of high quality data. And most of you are probably familiar with the National COVID Cohort Collaborative, which was led by our former faculty member, Melissa Handel, who has now moved on to the University of Colorado. Some of our faculty and students have taken advantage of that data set. And there's also some other big data sets that have come forth out of COVID. Although some of these are expanding. Well, actually, the Consortium for Clinical Characterization actually comes from the Odyssey project, which is a much larger data set, and likewise Open Safely from the UK. So I see him in the audience, so I wanted to put out a plug for one of our students, Carlos Figueroa Castro, who was looking for a capstone project for his master's degree. He's an infectious disease physician who has an interest in non-tuberculous mycobacterium infection. So mycobacterium is known to Mycobacterium tuberculosis is the famous bacteria that causes tuberculosis, but there are other there are other species of Mycobacterium, and his research interests. And so he was able to kind of kick the tires of the N3C, and he's gotten a couple publications out of it. And so, and there's a process one goes through to create a data use agreement. And so this opportunity is available to other students, faculty, and so forth. This is not new news, but we continue to make progress in data standards. So the 21st Century Cures rule has really started to kind of create a common format for interoperability of data. We still have a ways to go, but we've at least now kind of agreed upon the format using the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, or FHIR, and hopefully this will lead to more standardization of data, so ability to use data across different sites to merge data sets together and so forth. Another activity of work that has been going on in the last year, we have recognized that those of us who promote the use of the electronic health record, have created a double-edged sword. We have, I don't think anyone would argue that we should go back to paper medical records, but the systems that have been developed and implemented, not always by those of us in the academic informatics community, but clearly a number of the electronic health record implementations around the U.S. have added burden, in particular documentation burden, which burdens clinician time and is associated with clinician burnout. And so a number of initiatives have been undertaken. Probably the highest profile has been the 25 by 5 initiative, led by Columbia and Vanderbilt, with funding from the National Library of Medicine, aiming to reduce documentation burden to 25% of its current level in 5 years. And there will be many ways that we do that. We'll build better systems, we'll be more cognizant of workflow. There will likely be a role for machine learning. For example, I think a big opportunity is with voice. I always argue, sometimes people say, should we get the computer out of the exam room? And I argue, no, we should get the keyboard out of the exam room, but we should keep the computer there. And hopefully, and in fact, there are systems, including some commercial ones now, that capture the patient-physician interaction and generate a note and things like that, that will hopefully contribute to reducing the burden. The last thing I will mention, and then I will unshare and open the floor, is around certification of informatics professionals. So healthcare is a discipline that has a certification of individuals, probably more for those who work in operational settings than, say, academic or research settings. But certification is a way that we can recognize and verify a certain level of education, experience, and knowledge of an individual. And the clinical informatics subspecialty for physicians has been around for almost a decade now. And there is a process for physicians to become board certified in clinical informatics, and many of us are. There's also a process to train future board certified physicians, such as our ACGME accredited fellowship. But physicians are not the only group that work in operational informatics. And so AMIA has been working on a certification process. This, again, mostly focused on operational healthcare settings, although I think it will broaden to things like public health and perhaps research and things like that. And this process has taken a long time. There's been a lot of starts and stops. The name has changed. It's currently called the AMIA Health Informatics Certification, or AHIC. And it's actually, I have this wrong here. It's actually not only for clinicians, but it includes clinicians who come from non physician backgrounds, so nurses, pharmacists, dentists. But it's also meant for people who work in public health, actually for people who are not clinicians, who have other formal training and work in informatics professionally. So AMIA has established its Health Informatics Certification Commission, and the first offering of the certification exam will take place this fall. This is a little different than a lot of physician certifications in that you actually have to have some, in addition to, eventually you'll have to have at least a master's degree in informatics. There's ways now to grandfather in with professional work. But even once that grandfathering period ends, there will be a period of work experience that one needs before they can be eligible to get certified, which maybe in perhaps is the sort of equivalent for a residency or a fellowship that physicians do. But anyways, it'll be interesting to see the uptake of this certification. People ask me, should I be certified in informatics? And I tell people that it can't hurt. It's a credential. Of course, so is a degree or a graduate certificate. That's also a credential as well. I think ultimately will come down to those who hire people who work in informatics. We do see among physicians in informatics now that board certification, it's not an absolute, but it is something as physicians who are becoming things like chief medical information officer and so forth, that there is a certification that's required, or that many people who hire want to see happen. And we'll see what happens in terms of AHIC and others who work in informatics besides physicians. So I'm going to stop at this point and stop my sharing. And I see that there's been plenty of conversation going on in the chat. I will, let's see, maybe, well, actually, let me just stop and open the floor if anyone wants to unmute. And while you're doing that, I will look through the chat and see if there's anything of interest there. So what did I forget? What else should I have mentioned? Feel free to unmute and speak up. Okay, well, I will look through the chat. I do see that interesting about Germany. I was actually not aware of that, but certainly one of the reasons for trying to identify people are those who are in group settings who may infect others, and it's a challenge with children. We know that children generally tend to do well after COVID infection, though a small fraction of them do not, and then they also have the potential to infect others in their families or communities and so forth. Yes, I see that Kate was elected as a fellow of AMIA. Congratulations. And I see that some people are talking about going to the AMIA meeting. I'm glad that we will have some representation there. I will be there too. Let's see, what else do we have? I see other comments about infectious disease tracing, which probably some of you are more expert than I am. Homer asks, will, it also requires logical reasoning. Will that happen in the US? Hard to say. Sarah has asked about, yeah, who will be at Amy. I know that some of our trainees will be there. Um, and and yeah, so let's see. Atalia has asked about Ted. Ted also has left OHSU. Ted was is still a very important contributor to the field. Um, Decided to follow his interests into industry. We are obviously working on finding replacements for teaching the courses that he teaches. He was a very prolific teacher and one who's not replaced easily. So we are working on that. Um, and Oh, I should also note, someone reminded me that one of our PhD students, Rose Gwet, has won an award in, just see where I can find it here. Um, Actually, if she wants to speak up, she can. She won a small grant to build on her work in developing um, uh, patient decision aids for questions about contraception and so forth. So thank you, Rose, from the Society of Family Planning. And again, if anyone else wants me to mention anything else that is important to be mentioned, you can chat me privately or publicly, putting it into the chat. Anything else that I have forgot to mention? This is one of the downsides about video conferencing, is that the silence. But obviously, many of you are typing in. Yes, someone else. um, Another award that Da Jin, one of our clinical informatics fellows, she's been awarded a fellowship in diagnostic excellence from the Society to Improve Diagnosis in Medicine, and that complements her clinical informatics fellowship, and she's doing that with a group of people. By the way, if you all followed our Twitter feed, you would have known about both of those awards. That's where I'm actually going to find information about them, into the OHSU Informatics Twitter feed, which everyone should follow and contribute to. Great. Thank you, Rose, for publishing the URL. And maybe, I think, Daz, we actually, let's see, here we go. Let's see. And of course, it goes without saying that faculty have continued to be awarded grants and so forth. Steve Bedrick and myself awarded an R01 from NLM. I know that David Dorr has received a number of grants funded. Karen Eden, it's not a new grant, but she's actually going to be featured by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality for her grant. Yes, and the work that Vishnu and Jeff do, also funded by AHRQ. So Nicole, of course, her recent R21. Well, good. We obviously we need a better system for publicizing. I mean, I think Twitter is actually a nice way to do it, and um, uh, a number of the other informatics programs, like we do, use Twitter to get the word out. Twitter's great for just sending out a URL. So and so got a new grant, and of course Virginia mentioning that Our graduates are doing well in getting jobs and making good salaries, which we recognize is important. And for the trainees, um, you should take advantage of Virginia's knowledge and expertise. I don't know that anyone knows any more about the informatics job market than Virginia, and it's great for us to have her and to be available to students and others. Okay, I guess maybe we'll be seeing uh, um, Jeff Gold and Vishnu and Court Garrison in OHSU Now today. Okay. Well, on that note, we're just about at the hour anyways. Um, Maybe someday again we will have these conferences back in the big theater, and maybe we'll even have pizza. But I have a feeling that those big conferences will be among the last things to return to normal. But anyways, for those who are eligible to get boosters, I hope you'll do so. I hope that we will be able to um, get back to some semblance of being together. I was hoping to do more of it this summer, but then Delta came and that kind of put the kibosh on some of that.
Bill, what's the latest on going back to campus?
Um, we are still in modified operations until Delta is under control.
Okay.
Um, the good news is that we've hit the peak in Oregon. Those of you probably like myself who either follow the Connie Seeley emails or also again on Twitter. Every day, OHSU News publishes a graphic showing the number of cases in the hospital, number of cases, number of patients on ventilators and in the ICU, and they break them out by vaccinated and unvaccinated. And you see that almost none of the ventilator and ICU patients are unvaccinated. There, unfortunately, are a small number of breakthrough cases. We're on modified operations through the end of the fall quarter. I think that once the numbers really unquestionably start to come back down. I mean, remember in the summer, in like early July, we were down to like 3 COVID patients in the hospital. We went back up to about 50 or 60. I think we're down in the 40s now. So hopefully we'll be returning at some point or have the ability to return. Okay, well, I see we're at the hour, so I want to thank everyone for coming today. I want to encourage everyone to consider um, talking in this conference. Let us hear about your great work. For faculty, you might find students who want to expand upon your great work and also participate in our various forms of social media. Okay, well, have a good day, everyone, and see you all soon. Bye bye.